Good morning. Welcome to the Women Talk Construction podcast, where we're not just building structures, but we're also paving the way for women in one of the toughest industries out there. I'm Christi Powell, and with me today is my co-host, Angela Gardner. She's a powerhouse in the construction field who's breaking barriers one project at a time. And today, let's get started. We have Monika and Jessica with us today from Turner Construction and Stafford Rosenbaum. And we're so happy to have them with us today. And this podcast is airing near Thanksgiving. So we want to say what we're thankful for today. Myself, I'm thankful for friends in the built environment because I don't understand it all. Angela.
I'm thankful for a sense of belonging. Today is the Construction Inclusion Week, and we're talking about belonging. And so that's what I'm thankful for all of you women that make me feel like I belong somewhere.
Jessica.
I'm thankful for, this whole resiliency network that I've really developed in large part thanks to Monika over the past few years. And I'm always very thankful for Monika, my resiliency guru.
Nice.
I was also going to say that I'm thankful for you, Jessica, and all the women in the built environment that I know I can count on if I need it.
Awesome. Well, let's get started. So, Jessica and Monika, let's talk a little. Let's let you introduce yourself a little bit more. Jessica is with Stafford Rosenbaum, and after practicing for a decade in Texas, she moved to Wisconsin, where she litigates business matters in state and federal courts across the United States. That's pretty cool. And then Monika, she's held roles in most phases of the construction management sector in the last 20 years, and she believes that both climate adaptation and mitigation should be ingrained in the built environment. So we are excited about this conversation. And Jessica, tell us a little bit more about you, and then we'll let Monika talk a little bit more about herself.
Sure. Yes, I moved up here. I'm actually originally from Minnesota. So the move from Texas to Wisconsin was much easier for me than it would be for maybe a native Texan. But I've been doing business litigation for over 2 decades, but I actually got into construction litigation kind of by accident over a decade ago. And it was actually working on a massive infrastructure related case that I had an expert mention, this might be related to climate change. Even here in the Midwest, we're impacted by it. Heavier rainfalls, years of heavier floodings, years of drought impact groundwater levels, which can impact pretty much any infrastructure project. And that got me thinking. And actually that same expert had Monika on a webinar during COVID era times. And I reached out to her. And ever since, we've been working on just all issues related to preparing our built environment and, importantly, protecting our construction workers too during that process from the effects of climate change.
Awesome. And you have a podcast, the two
And
of you together, right? I forgot to mention that. Yes, Adapt.
So Monika and I, we started writing together. We published articles. We started presenting together. We've kind of been on a lot of like the resiliency speaker tour. But we kept meeting so many amazing people and interviewing amazing people that we were like, you know what, we really need to do, kind of like you guys are, a podcast where we get to bring on different experts across like the entire built environment to talk about resiliency and adaptation things. And when we talk about resiliency and adaptation to climate change, my own coworkers at my law firm still get confused. We're not talking about the sustainability part for the most part, which is important. That's, going green, solar panels, renewable energy. That's all important. That's all trying to minimize how bad climate change is going to be. What Monika and I focus on is the adaptation side, the recognition that, as we've just seen this fall with the horrendous hurricanes, the effects of climate change are here in lots of different ways, from wildfires to floods to hurricanes to tornadoes in Wisconsin in February. And so we need to start changing how we think about designing and building our built environment, because in Wisconsin 20 years ago, all you cared about was making sure it could withstand the cold. Now there's a lot more issues we need to be thinking about. And so that's what Monika and I focus on in our podcast, which we are doing our second season of this fall.
Awesome. Very awesome. And you've had some great guests on. The podcast is amazing if you're not listening, audience.
Thank you.
Yeah, check it out. It's Adapt Climate Change in the Built Environment. I'll go ahead and introduce myself. So I have been working all my career, all 20 years in the construction management sector. I'm a mechanical engineer by background, and I currently lead the climate resilience program at Turner Construction, which essentially means that I promote climate resilience in both the buildings that we build for our clients and also our construction sites. So the construction phase and everything associated with our operations, right? So think of supply chain and other different severe weather events that can affect the operation of our sites, our schedules, our budgets, etc. I also co-host the podcast with Jessica and have always had a passion for dealing with climate change in the built environment. And to Jessica's point, there's a couple of studies out there, but it essentially summarizes to about 7 to 9% of all financial investments go to climate mitigation. So that is sustainability. It's trying to decarbonize the built environment. Sorry, I said that fact wrong. So 7 to 9% of climate investments go to climate adaptation, which means that the opposite, right? So about more than 90% go towards climate mitigation. So it's slowing down climate change.
Mm.
And so just what Jessica was saying, at this point, there are plenty of studies out there. If we stopped emitting carbon today, so if we really went net zero, there would still be effects from climate change for decades. So all those
Wow.
hurricanes that are becoming more intense, they're lasting longer, they're hovering over land longer, they'll continue to happen. So we focus our efforts into dealing with the effects of all those severe weather events, hurricanes, wildfires, poor air quality, etc. And how do we deal with that on our day-to-day operations, right? Not just only our construction sites, but our people, the users of the built environment, and how we live day by day.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, let's dive in then because many of our followers are small or medium sized businesses and they're owners, or they might want to be owners someday, but there are some questions that they have that we can't answer, and y'all are experts. So, this first one's for Jessica. What are the costs of construction litigation? Like, what does that like? Where would you direct someone with that topic?
Yeah. So construction litigation is very costly and very big, which is why there's so many construction lawyers. Because usually, if there's a problem during or after a project has been built, everybody who touched that project gets sued, or lots of them. The owner or developer is suing the general contractor or the architect. They bring in all the subs, they bring in material suppliers. Then you have insurance fights. So it gets very costly. And the truth is, it's so expensive that a lot of times I have people coming to me saying, I have a fight over $100,000. And I'm like, you know what? That's a tough fight to have, because you may be spending more money on the litigation than what the potential liability is. So what I spend my whole life trying to basically talk myself out of a job. And that's part of what I started with this podcast with Monika, but it's beyond climate change. So much of the issues can be addressed in making sure your contracts up front are tight, right? I will have people coming to me saying, I didn't agree to that. That's crazy. And then I look at the contract and I'm like, yes, you did. So I always tell people, I get it. Talking to lawyers is expensive. I've had to use lawyers in the past. I don't like writing those bills. But a lot of times spending some time up front with a lawyer, talking about the possible risk and really looking at contracts, or if you're drafting your own contracts to work with your subcontractors or something, you can save a lot of money if you invest that up front. And then specifically with regard to climate change, what happens is that there is still so much, even I'll see it in big infrastructure projects where things are fuzzy, where is it the engineer's responsibility as part of a design, or Monika's heard me say this a million times, is it part of contractor means and methods, which everybody always tells me they know what it means. And I'm like, I can't go into a court and actually tell you where that line is, right? And so a lot of construction were like, well, this is how we've always done it here. Or again, in Wisconsin, groundwater levels are stable. So we only need to check them every decade. And we can design a plan, assuming we're going to install it 5-6 years later, and groundwater levels haven't changed. And so the big thing that we talk about is, do not assume that the way you did things in the past is the way it's going to work in the future. So there's even a form. I'm sure a lot of your contractors are familiar with the AIA, the American Institute of Architects or something, and they
Yes.
have a lot of contracts. A lot of those you have to go to an architect to actually work with, but they do have on their website like a hazard risk acknowledgement form. So even just going to that and taking a look at that, it makes everybody to the construction project start thinking about what are the risks and who's responsible for dealing with them. Because I always tell people litigation comes up when there's problems and there's confusion over who's responsible, right? If there's a problem, but it's clear who's responsible for it, usually you can avoid litigation in those cases. But it's when you're not sure, I thought you were handling that. I thought you were handling that. That's where you have the problem. So that hazard risk acknowledgement form is a really simple tool to just start looking at and thinking about, what are the issues that we should be thinking about, and more importantly, who is responsible for addressing that issue.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yes.
That is definitely a lot, but it was great information. And
We have lots of
AIA,
blog posts and articles on this too that we can send you so that people
good.
aren't
That would be
totally
great. And
lost.
we'd love
Yeah.
to attach those to
Yeah.
your podcast. That would be amazing. And I'm just writing down now the AIA resource. Just
Yeah, I
having,
wrote that down.
having that available would be really good for those that, are like me that don't understand a whole lot about it.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've actually been in one of those through my family business. And so listen to Jessica. Listen. It
Yeah.
matters.
Yeah. Spend
Get
little
a
bit on
good
the lawyer
attorney
upfront.
that cares about you and will tell you the truth, even if it is, don't fight it. So,
Yeah. Sometimes that's a sad, hard truth that I have to tell clients, and it's not fun, but it is the just most economic decision.
learn from it.
Yeah. So next, Monika, we have a question for you. I'd like to know a little bit more about the legal risks of ignoring climate change, because I know I have been over the years. And what does that impact have on construction projects?
Well, let's see. So I think I'm going to try to bring it down and connect it to what just Jessica said, and then I'll jump into the legal risks of
Okay,
ignoring
that sounds
climate
good.
change. So I think we have to start with understanding that our climate is changing. There's more severe weather events, right? And when it comes, so I'm going to talk about two different buckets. One, the finished building, right, that we construction companies build. But we may not always design, right, or have major
Oh, yeah.
decisions. And then our construction sites. So because there is more hurricanes, there's more extreme wind, there's hotter summers and even hotter springs and hotter falls. If we don't prepare for that climate, and if we don't look at future climate projections, which are many out there, and we can send you some resources for links to websites where you can put a zip code and figure out what those climate estimates are. If we don't plan for them, our operations and the buildings that we build will be affected. Most building codes do not include resilience to future climate estimates. And so we can rely on them alone. That is beyond the fact that only 16 states in the United States actually enforce codes. Yes, some cities, some counties, some townships do, but not everywhere. So we have to be proactive in order to mitigate risk, right? Legal being one of them. It's almost like as if you look at the weather today and it's going to be cold and rainy, and then you go out there in shorts and flip-flops. Like we wouldn't do that, right? So we have to prepare for what's coming.
Yeah.
So the risks associated with ignoring climate change, there's so many that we could talk hours about this,
Yes.
but it's essentially, just talking about our construction phase, right? Which we contractors control most of it. Our schedules have to incorporate the effects of climate change. Our budgets have to incorporate the effects of climate change. And what does that mean? Let's just talk about extreme heat alone, right? Extreme heat is affecting, there's a couple of things. Places that are hot, have been hot historically, are getting hotter and more humid. And places that were not hot before, think of Washington State and Oregon, there are becoming hotter. And there's a lot of, challenges with that. Not all places in places like Oregon and Washington State are air conditioned, right? Or, are prepared or acclimatized to deal with extreme heat. So our schedules and budgets in our construction sites should account for them. So if you know that your construction is going to take place in the summer, make sure you put some budget for, a cooling tent, like shade, electrolyte popsicles. Make sure that you talk to your workers about what heat can do to our body, and how perhaps hydrating overnight or having a glass of water or Gatorade along with your coffee or your energy drink, whatever the workers may take that morning, will help them stay healthy. And healthy workers are happy workers, and they're productive workers. And, we folks that are happy and healthy will come back. That is it is even linked to the fact that we have a whole workforce challenge, right? So it is about taking a look at what your climate estimates will be and incorporating them in your budgets and in your schedules, right? So there will be days that will be shut down because there are hurricanes that may affect sites.
Right.
If we don't account for climate change on the buildings that we build for our clients and in the construction sites, there's a range of risks that go from, losing money in court, or losing money in a lawyer that you could have invested at the beginning, reviewing your contracts, to claims, insurance claims. Insurance does not cover everything these days. So you got to read those insurance policies very, very carefully. Flood insurance is not always covered. You may have to do kind of like a mix of different insurance policies. So it's essentially money that you will be able to spend. You will be able to lose, as well as reputational risk. And I know you asked about legal risk, but there's a reputational risk associated with not incorporating climate change. We at Turner, we pride ourselves of repeated clients, and I'm sure most contractors do. And so if, you have to make sure that you account for climate change, protect the sites for your client and the buildings that you built. So I kind of just touched on some of those topics. I could go on for longer, but I'll leave it at that.
That was really good. And I love how everything that you're talking about, it sounds like, to me, it sounded like big and almost unattainable from somebody that doesn't understand it, right? But the way you guys are approaching it, to me, it's really a holistic change that we all need to be taking advantage of, right? Or we need to be planning for, or we need to be prepared for, like you said. This is not just about buildings and money. This is also about people and their health. And that is so important. So you've really, what you're doing is not just about money and buildings. It's about people. And I think that people want to hear more of that, right? We want to keep the people that we have on board, and making air conditioning tents in Oregon because it's hotter than ever. I would have never, a lot of people that are listening probably would have never thought of that, right? And so that's the other reason that these contracts need to be looked over. And the fact that insurance is not covering. We just found out with this Western North Carolina thing, right?
Exactly.
Nobody thought that there would be flooding ever in Western North Carolina. And here we are 1,000 years later, and all these people have lost their homes and they don't have flood insurance. So it's really important. Thank you for sharing that, and just opening our eyes to what this really means, because we see the change, right? Like us, just people that don't live in your world. Why do we have twin hurricanes? Like, why is this so excessive? Why is there the first flood ever in 1,000 years in a place that nobody ever thought would flood? And that's what it is. It's the climate change. So sorry, I had to throw that in there because I'm excited about the fact that I'm starting to just kind of like put all the puzzles in the place where they go, the pieces in the puzzle. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and let's shift
impact everything. Oh, I'm sorry, Angela, but yeah, it is. It touches everything once you start looking at it. Sorry, Angela.
Oh, no. Well, we're going to now talk a little bit about the changes or the impact on the built environment, and we would like for each of y'all to kind of chip in on that response.
Yeah, really quickly, I will say, and kind of, Christi, to your point too about it impacting everything, Monika and I, like on our podcast or in our writings, we focus a lot on individual buildings, right? And Are they able to withstand, again, like in Wisconsin, heavier winds, wind-driven rain, those kind of things? In parts of the country, you actually have to worry about land subsidence. Like you build a perfectly fine building, but because the groundwater is being taken out, because there's not enough surface water, you're literally basically sucking the soil out from underneath. So there's all kinds of risks there. But one of the things we like to talk about too is that you can't just look at each building in isolation, right? You can build the most resilient building in the world, but if the roads and the sewer systems and everything else, the power lines don't work and workers can't get there or anything
Good
like that,
point.
it doesn't matter. And so it's, the infrastructure in particular is so vulnerable to all the impacts of climate change. I mean, again, extreme heat. Monica and I have I think it's probably our most popular episode of season one time about extreme heat and workers. But honestly, extreme heat is incredibly damaging to infrastructure too. Obviously, to asphalt, it makes, and even it can impact airport tarmacs kind of thing, or railroad lines. So those are some of the risks. Monica?
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that and go even deeper on. So there are train delays when it's too hot, and the reason why that is because the rails expand, and then the trains can't run as fast. And usually, the ones waiting out there, in the heat, are those folks that are relying on public transportation that need to go pick up a kid. So there's all this like systemic effects from climate change effects. From heat, just piggybacking on heat, how heat affects, they just warm up buildings more, AC is more needed, and then you're contributing to climate change more because you got to run the air conditioning for longer, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the operations of buildings. Some buildings may not have critical operations, but some do, like hospitals have to
Right.
areas that have to always be operating because there's folks hooked up to oxygen and services just in order to stay alive. And so those places must have redundancy. But there are certain things, like when Sandy hit in New York, and some buildings didn't have power and therefore didn't have AC. Windows in those hospitals were not operable. And so folks started breaking the windows because it was getting so hot and there was
Oh.
not enough power redundancy.
Oh,
So
wow.
things like, there's many resiliency features out there that buildings can incorporate. Operable windows is some of them, besides just the insulation, besides redundancy. Hopefully, it's a redundancy that it's powered by batteries and solar panels that could be also energy resilience. But there's many ways in which the built environment can be affected and will continue to be affected.
That's awesome. One of the things that you said that really like hit home for me is just operating windows. I've often thought of that, being in the supply industry, and I had a lot of custom home builders, but I also had some commercial home builders, and we did some big projects with, the oh, what is that called? Between nursing home and their own home. I don't know why it just left
Assisted
me.
living?
Yes,
Assisted
yes,
living?
assisted living.
Oh,
We
Yeah.
did several of those really big projects. It just left my mind. It's okay. Um, we did several of those, and I've often thought, why are these windows not operable? What if kind of thing? And, it was code. We couldn't make them operable in certain areas. So anyway, I'm glad that you mentioned that. And I'm taking so many notes, I literally can't even look up and see your faces. So I appreciate all the information. But we're going to have to, I can't believe 20
Yeah.
minutes has flown by. But I still have one question I really want to ask you. Can you both give us, now this question was specifically for Monica, but since we're getting ready to wrap up, I'd love to have resources from both of you. Tell our audience what kind of resources that they can find that can incorporate resiliency, because this isn't something that you hear these contractors talking about in their weekly meetings, right? They're not talking about incorporating resiliency every single meeting. So I think resources that you know of to be able to share with our audience would be awesome.
Monica, do you want to start?
Sure, I'll get started. So, OSHA has some great resources on how to prepare for extreme heat and many other disasters. The Red Cross does as well. So, just starting to speak to your workforce on how to prepare for those disasters, both at the site and at your home. Because I think Jessica alluded to the fact that
Good
if you're
point.
dealing with, a flood at home, you're not going to be focused at work. You might not even
No.
make it right to your
Yeah.
job site. So I would say OSHA has great resources. The Red Cross also does. FEMA has some great resources as well, and we can allude to some of them. And I will send you a link to a couple of sites where you can put an address. It can be your home, it can be your job site, where you can get future climate estimates through 2050. So if it's your
Oh,
home and you're
nice.
about to
Great.
like get on a mortgage, you can actually find out if you're ever going to have a flood risk. Now, for a site, you may not have to look, all the way through
Yeah.
2050. So you can maybe just look at the FEMA. There's a great site, FEMA NRI. You put your address there, and it'll give you the climate risks for that specific location, and then you plan for them, right? So that's the first step. It's like, what are the climate hazards that I need to worry about, and then plan for them.
Awesome.
Yeah, and then jumping on that, there are also, just for like literally how do we build resilient buildings or communities, there are now so many resources from the international level down to even city level sometimes. So, and especially, quite frankly, once you get down to the city level, a lot of times it's those cities like New York or Boston that either had to deal with climate change related disasters or are very worried about them. But even like Tucson has one, so what I actually did at one point, and I can send you a link to this because I had so many people saying, well, I didn't even know there were resources out there.
I didn't either.
I actually made a blog post for our firm website at one point, just kind of listing, and I'm sure I need to update it because there's so many more every year, but kind of listing from the highest international level down to state and city level, different resiliency guidelines that, again, they're not necessarily going to be drawings, but they give you a lot of tools and ideas and guidance for what you should be thinking of. I will also say engineers and architects, their websites too, really do recognize that they have a real responsibility to address climate change. So while individual engineers and architects may still just be thinking about, well, what's the local building code here? The bigger institutions also do have, resources and talk about this a lot.
Well, y'all shared some wonderful resources with our audience. And hopefully, by the way, we will have these links on the website so that everyone can click on them as well. And of course, we want both you, Jessica, and Monica, to tell our guests how to continue to be in touch with you and keep hearing even your wonderful podcast.
Well, listen to us, listen to our
Yeah.
podcast, Adapt Climate Change in the Built Environment. I also urge everyone to follow me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active about, sharing articles and posts on climate adaptation in the built environment. And our website for our podcast is adaptthebuiltenvironment.com. So you can also check out all of our episodes there. And most of the
yay.
podcast platforms have our podcast too.
Great.
Yeah, so I'll echo everything Monica just said. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm not as good about being active on there as Monica is. I always mean to. So my firm, again, I do have a blog. We have a blog there where I try to post a lot of things in addition to the articles that Monica and I have done. Those are also linked on there. And I do have to give a plug just for people looking for lawyers. If you're not in Wisconsin, I'm actually part of our firm is part of this Alpha network. That's basically, it's local kind of law firms in each state. So that's a great resource. And they have a ton of fabulous construction lawyers. So through my law firm or through Alpha, you can also go if you are looking for a lawyer to talk to. And I tell everyone, spend the money up front with a lawyer so you don't have to hire a litigator at the end. So I really recommend that too.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much for being on the show today. We really appreciate it.
We appreciate you.
Thank you for the opportunity. This was so much fun.
Agreed. Thank you so much. And thanks for what you're doing too. It is hard to be a woman in construction. And so I appreciate you guys out there doing this heavy lifting.
Well, we're doing it together, right?
Yes,
like all of us
together.
are making a difference. So thank you so much. And thank you for educating our audience on something that maybe some of us haven't even thought about before, but it is very important for us to be thinking about it holistically, right? For our people and for the buildings and for the risks that are taken. So thank you again for joining us today.
Thank
And
you.
happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Happy
Happy
Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving.